This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
Chapter 20 of the Fires of Heaven, Jangai Pass, and our symbol is the Aes Sedai symbol. Under the looming spine of the world, Rand guided Ch20 up the stony slope from the foothills that began the foot of Jangai Pass. The dragon wall pierced the sky, dwarfing all other mountains, its snow-capped peaks defying the baking afternoon sun. The tallest thrust well above clouds that mocked the waste with promises of rain that had never come. Rand could not imagine why a man would want to climb a mountain, but it was said that men who had tried to scale these heights had turned back, overcome with fear and unable to breathe. He could well believe that a man might grow too afraid to breathe, attempting to climb so high. Yet, though the Cairhienin are consumed with the game of houses, Moiraine was saying, at his shoulder, they will follow you so long as they know that you are strong. Be firm with them, but I would ask you to be fair also. A ruler who gives true justice... He tried to ignore her, as he did the other riders, and the creak and rumble of Kadir's wagons, making heavy going further back. The broken gorges and gullies of the waste were behind them, but these rugged rising hills, nearly as barren, were little better for wagons. No one had traveled this path in over 20 years. Moiraine talked at him that way from daybreak to sunset whenever he let her. Her lectures could be on small things, details of court behavior, say, in Cairhien or Saldea or somewhere else, or on large, the political influence of the White Cloaks, or perhaps the effects of trade on rulers' decisions to go to war. It was as if she meant to see him educated, as a noble would be, or should be, before he reached the other side of the mountains. It was surprising how often what she said reflected what anyone back in Emond's Field would have called simple common sense, and also how often it did not. Occasionally, she came out with something startling. For instance, that he should trust no woman of the tower except herself, Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve, or the news that Elaida was now the Amyrlin seat. Oath to obey or no, she would not tell him how she knew that. She said it was someone else's place to tell if she chose, someone else's secret, and she could not usurp it. He suspected the Wise One dreamwalkers, though they had stared him right in the eye and refused to say aye or nay. He wished he could make them swear Moraine's oath. They interfered between him and the chiefs continually, as if they wanted him to go through them to reach the chiefs. Right that minute he did not want to think about Elaida or the Wise Ones, or listen to Moiraine. Now he wanted to study the pass ahead, a deep gap in the mountains that twisted as though a blunt axe had tried to chop through again and again, never quite succeeding. A few minutes' hard ride and he could be in it. On one side of the pass mouth, a sheer cliff had been smoothed over 100 pace width and carved, a wind-weathered snake entwining a staff a good 300 spans high, monument or marker or ruler sigil. It surely dated from some lost nation before Arthur Hawkwing, perhaps even before the Trolloc Wars. He had seen remnants before from nations long vanished. Often, even Moiraine did not know their source. High on the other side, so far up that he was not sure he was seeing what he thought, just below the snow line, stood something even stranger, something that made the first monument of a few thousand years a commonplace. He could have sworn it was the remnants of shattered buildings, shining gray against the darker mountain, and stranger still, what appeared to be a dock of the same material. As for ships, slanting drunkenly down the mountain, if he was not imagining it, that had to date from before the breaking. The face of the world had been changed utterly in those years. This could well have been an ocean's floor, before. He would have to ask Asmodean. Even if he had the time, he did not think he would want to try reaching that altitude to find out for himself. At the foot of the huge snake lay Tain, a high-walled town of moderate size, a remnant, itself, of the time when Cairhien had been allowed to send caravans across the threefold land, and wealth had flowed from Shara along the Silk Path.
There's just a lot of description in this chapter to start it off with.
Yeah. But certain things like that I feel like are really important to, like I said, set the scene, but kind of get us into the rhythm of where we are and what we're looking at.
So, I mean, one thing I just want to talk about is how he mistakes the stories of lack of air high on the Dragon Mount as people basically being unable to breathe because of fear.
On the Dragon Wall, yeah.
I think he's talking about the Dragon Mount?
Near Tarvalon?
Oh, no, the Dragon Wall, you're right.
I also enjoyed that. People wouldn't know unless you had gone up there and felt it. You don't know what altitude sickness is. Yeah, guys, it's a real weird feeling. I've had it a couple of times while backpacking.
Just the altitude sickness?
Yeah.
Never quite. I guess I've gone up in, like, Denver, but never really tried to be active in a high altitude like that, I guess.
Yeah, it was scary. First, I thought I was hungover. Then I thought I was getting sick. And then I couldn't really remember why I was there or what I was doing. It's like, oh, lack of oxygen. Took me a minute, but I figured it out eventually. I just proceeded very slowly. I also remember that I couldn't eat that night. I felt so gross.
Just lightheaded and sick.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions about the pass itself. The fact that he says it looked like someone took an axe to it over and over and over again kind of makes me think it was actually created by the One Power during the Age of Legends.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem to be like a natural gap in the mountains where like two mountains come together. It doesn't really seem to be like a river pass, but like someone took an axe to it over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon phenomena. Just a pass through the mountain. It's the lowest point that you can get through.
And then, of course, the way that she knows, they know that Elaida is the Amyrlin seat, and of course, Moiraine knows that because the girls, not the Aiel Dreamwalkers, but because Egwene and Nynaeve figured it out.
Right, so everybody's protecting Egwene's actions? I don't want to say secret. It's not necessarily a secret that she can dreamwalk, but I can see why people are concerned about spreading information to people who really don't need to know it, like Rand.
And then they say no one's been this way in 20 years. And that was odd to me because I kind of assumed that merchants had traveled this path many times. And so I know that the Aiel haven't. But aren't merchants using the Jangai Pass?
I don't know. I assume we know people come to the way sometimes, but I imagine there's more than one way. We also know the Aiel will pretty much kill anyone, any Kyrianan that comes in there.
Oh, certainly. The Kyrianan they sell off to the Sharans. They take across the waste and sell them like cattle, is what they say.
Right.
Everybody else they just ignore until they die. They let the waste take care of them. All right, so there are a number of passes in the waste. I guess this is just one of those that's not highly used.
Yeah, I would think so.
Once the Aiel War passed, they didn't want any Kyrianan coming in, so they just sort of stopped using that. So I guess the other passes into the waste were the ones that people have been using and not going through Kyrian. That makes more sense to me. And then I kind of want to talk about this staff with the snake around it, because that seems like a giant rod of Ooh, help me out here. Asclepius. Asclepius. The rod of Asclepius.
Your guess is as good as mine. Some Greek guy from a long time ago.
It's Greek mythology, and it sort of has synonyms with rebirth and healing, like a snake shedding its skin, because it's basically a snake wrapped around a staff. And I was wondering if that... It's really the first time I've noticed this, like, gigantic statue, like, that overawes the town itself. I mean, it's just huge. I didn't realize just how quite big it was until I was reading this in detail.
A serpent-entwined rod wielded by the Greek god Asclepius?
Yeah, that's the one.
Or something like that. A deity associated with healing and medicine. It's still used today. Most hospitals have like a picture of one on their sign.
Don't they have the double snake, though?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's like a slightly different...
It looks more like DNA.
No, okay, no, I see the Star of Life features that staff as well.
The World Health Organization flag has it. Yeah, it's a symbol of medicine in our world.
Certainly a ubiquitous symbol for healing, and so I just thought that was interesting to see that above this town, which used to be a port town, because the waste used to be the seabed, as we've seen just from like the salt flats and all the various things that they talk about. Like,
it would make sense, yeah.
That in the breaking, that part of the world was underwater, or before the breaking, I mean. And of course, before there was that period of time that once they found, and we've talked about the whole history of the Aiel and how they had the water shared with them, and they wanted to repay the Kyrianan, and that's why they gave them the sapling of Alvendasora. And then up until 20 years ago, so it was like a 500-year period where the Kyrian were rich from trading across the waste with the Sharans.
Right. We see a little bit more on it later, but I seem to recall, without looking directly at the quote, that it was... I think Rand has the thought of something like when the Aiel came to Kyrian and gave the Avendaladora, the cutting from the Avendasora, even the Kyrianan seemed confused because they were commemorating an event that had happened like 500 years before that. They're like, thanks, cool.
Yeah, and he says here, like, the Aiel don't like the Wetlanders. They just felt they owed them through Ch20. So they really felt it was like a debt owed, was to give them this cutting for the water sharing. That even though they didn't like them, Ch20 forced them to be kind to the Kyrian. And now it's like this ultimate betrayal of someone. You gave someone you didn't like something you trust, and then they just destroyed it anyway. And you're just like, oh, see, I knew I didn't like you for a reason. Wetlander.
Bunch of tree killers. The only other thing I wanted to add about this section is that, just to reinforce, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that Moiraine is preparing for her own death. She is, fairly convinced that that she may die soon. And even if she doesn't die, she's going to be stuck with the Fin for a while. So she's trying to prepare Rand. That's why she keeps bothering him. She wants him to listen to her lectures because she is no longer certain how much more time she has with him. It may only be days.
And you see her all the time when she says, "You must, please," and it's like, you must do this thing. And she keeps talking about how much time we have left, and like, we don't have all that much time, and you never know what's going to happen. And it's like, she's trying to avoid saying it without violating the 3 oaths.
Yeah, and I mean, it occurred to me that she may well think that by telling people about what is about to happen, it could change what's going to happen, and therefore ruin her chances of taking Lanfear out of the picture and probably saving Rand.
Oh, absolutely, because Rand would have just tied her up and left her in a tent and said, "No, you're not going to interfere." Yeah. And then he would have left with Lanfear or been killed.
If not saving his life, saving at least his ability to continue on.
Right. I always thought of it as keeping him on the side of the light, right? That's when Moiraine says, "I will do anything to keep you from turning to the shadow," this is what she's talking about. She's not talking about killing Rand. She's talking about sacrificing herself for Rand.
Spear Lanfear through a gateway into another universe. And what happens to herself be damned, she's not concerned.
Oh, where they both get to be tortured for half a year.
Yeah.
Yay.
What a sacrifice.
And she knows what she's facing. She knows the loss of power. She knows the pain. She knows the length of time. And then we get, because we're in a Rand POV, we're starting to see the memories, the Lews Therin, the expressions, the ideas that Rand shouldn't have. For example, he's talking about Maruos, which is clearly a Age of Legends, call it Second Age, reference city. And he's like, wait a minute, that great city after it was retaken, immense towers blackened and collapsing, the remains of great bonfires at every street crossing, were those who had refused to swear to the shadow. So it's definitely from the War of Power. And he's like, oh my god, I'm generating these memories. But I don't really think he has a personality of LTT in his head yet. I think that he hasn't developed that insane mind in his head to explain the memories. So right now, he's just getting the memories in the same way that Matt is getting memories.
Right. It doesn't seem to be...
But because he's going insane, he invents a voice.
Right. It doesn't seem to be antagonistic yet. And for context, Rand starts thinking about Marui, or however you pronounce that, because he's looking up at this town, Tain. And actually, I'll just read this paragraph. Rand sees... The blotches on the walls of Tain were bodies, contorted in their final agonies, bloated in the sun and hanging by their necks in a row that seemed to encircle the town. The birds were glossy black ravens, and vultures with their heads and necks befouled. Some ravens perched on corpses, gorging, unconcerned for the new arrivals. The sickly sweet stench of corruption hung in the dry air, and the acrid smell of char. Iron-strapped gates stood gaping open on an expanse of ruin, soot-streaked stone houses and collapsed roofs. Nothing moved except the birds. And he's looking at this and he remembers a scene that was very similar in the War of the Shadow. Or the War of Power?
I want to say the War of the Shadow. Well, they're the same thing, right? Depends on who's...
Yeah, can I use those interchangeably? I think I can.
I think so, yeah. Someone said, I think this is pretty funny, Rand, we talked about he's got this memory leakage. And someone said, well, he should reboot. And so you've got the reboot on Dragonmount that lets him, refragment his hard drive. And so my thought was Lews Therin was the dragon, Rand is the dragon reborn, and Jesus Rand is the dragon rebooted.
After Veins of Gold.
So Lan spots some people hanging out in the rocks, and these are the survivors from the town, basically looking for hope. One thing I noticed here, I noticed Kadir is all in white, and I was curious, I guess that's just because it's hot out?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's because he's, like, in service to Lanfear? And that's that subtle hint that he's, like, Lanfear's person?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay. Well, because I think she left and said, what she's saying basically is she wants Kadir to keep an eye on Rand for her, and that's why when she comes back at the end of the thing, she's like, so I've been away, Kadir, tell me what's been going on. So I'm not sure if at this point he knows that he's serving Lanfear. I feel like once she reveals herself to Rand, she also reveals herself to Kadir.
Yeah, I don't think he does know.
Oh, you're right, because it's not... you're totally right, because she shows up as Kylie in that scene where she kills him, and he doesn't realize that she's Lanfear until that moment.
Yeah. But I mean, even if he did, nobody else who serves Lanfear has to wear a uniform.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just wonder if there's any significance to him wearing white. I thought I could find something, but I don't think I am.
I think it's just because they're in the waste.
Because white clothes reflect heat.
Yeah.
And Kadir is a big fat man.
Quick note that Rand notes they've been walking for half of a month, so I assume about 15 days. And then Lan tells him that he sees some people like hiding in the rocks outside of the town who are just, we find in a moment, desperate refugees. Tree
killers. And there's 3 in particular that show up. Well, there's Tal Nethin is this guy's name, who talks for a while, and then he brings up Ari Coral and Ander Coral, who are his 2 friends who show up. Rand actually takes them with him. We don't really get much about them. All we really know is that Tel, we hear at one point, trips on a stone and breaks his neck because of Rand's Deviranness. Just a random,
weird.
Chapter 30. So it's like there's this, he's here for a little while, and then this dude actually gets a couple lines and then gets killed by breaking his neck. Not the best luck. Survives the Aiel attack and then killed by Ta'Viren.
I wanted to ask, so the 2 men here are leather workers, we hear one of them say. Is one of these guys the guy that, redoes Rand's sword?
Oh, possibly. I don't remember who he gets to fix his sword.
I don't actually remember either, but Avienda gives it to him... Oh boy, I think in the next chapter, yeah.
Yeah, the whole chapter is based around, that's the title of the chapter, is The Gift of a Blade.
Another quick thing I wanted to take note of is in Rand's mind, hear him say, how long now had he been doing what was necessary instead of what was right? In a fair world, it would be one and the same. That made him laugh.
And the chapter ends with this line as well, where burying the dead is the one thing that's necessary is both necessary and right.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of one of the central themes I think we're seeing is Rand, and the point that Jordan is trying to make here is Rand has really gotten to the point where he's kind of compromised some of his morals. The Two Rivers boy is no longer a farmer boy who can pretend to be innocent. He has made some really hard choices. He's gone out into the waste. He's recruited the Aiel, and now he's coming back to conquer Randland, to conquer the Westlands.
With a giant army. He's a leader of several great nations now, and, when you're
he's protecting a Forsaken in his own hut.
When you're up that high, you don't have the luxury of making decisions that are always moral. You have to make decisions that are sometimes cringy,
He's made a deal with the devil in Lanfear and Asmodean.
Oh, well, I think there's some of that, but I mean, if you're a just ruler, you certainly defend your people, and sometimes to defend your people, you have to hurt people. It's a necessity that's...
Like in Tyr, when he was going after the nobles.
I think it is often understated that when people get into these positions of power, you have to make decisions that are morally gray all the time, You're
just trying to do the least amount of evil.
Right.
Not necessarily fix things.
Resonated with me a little bit because I was re-listening the other day to Dan Carlin's episode Destroyer of Worlds, I think it was called, where he kind of discusses how politics and war changed forever after the A-bomb was created.
I do really enjoy his history. It's well dramatized, and
oh yeah, that's what makes it fun. It's he colors it in for you, you know.
Yeah, no, which means that I do think occasionally some details are probably, might I say, overly brightened.
I think so.
But it's a dramatic reading, and it really lets the history sit in your mind and gives you like an image of what was happening.
Yeah, it can be very powerful because you can read a list of facts about World War I or something. It's all very dry and boring. But when you hear him describe what it would have been like to be at this place, of course there's some speculation, but it makes it real. Makes you more able to realize that these were human beings who actually lived through this, not just a story.
No, he does a great job. I think the one place I disagree with him is in where he tends to assume motivations of some people, where I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily why they were doing it. But again, that adds a lot of color and a lot of storytelling and a lot of like, it lets you identify with the characters to sort of be like, okay, that is something that they could have been thinking, you know? Sure. But I do think a lot of his descriptions have helped both of us understand and really relate to some of the bigger battles that we see in Wheel of Time, because he does such a good job of describing real historical battles that we can then imagine those like Jangai Pass or like the battle between the Aiel, and like really see how a battle like that, which doesn't involve a whole lot of the power, you know, or we can basically take the power and make that like cannons or, you know, modern guns. And so, like, I really do like what he says and how his battle descriptions can kind of apply to Wheel of Time, if that makes sense. And
sure,
I think that's
or
why
any battle.
Or any battle.
The man tells Rand that the Shaido were up and over the walls in the middle of the night, and before, you know, anyone was aware of what was happening, it was already over, pretty much.
And of course, Matt's like, oh, what about your 20 sentries and the guys you posted over there and the wall of defense that you, of course, set up, because doesn't everyone know how to do that? And the guy looks at him like, what are you talking about? We just had a guard.
Yeah, Matt says, like, in the night, were the sentries asleep? Surely you put someone on top of those walls. And the guy's like, yeah, no, we don't. There's a man at each gate, and that's all.
And, like, Matt's, like, slapping his forehead, and Lan's, like, looking at him, like, how do you know that, farmer boy? This is one of Lan's many hints that Matt is a great military mind.
Yeah, we'll see more of that soon.
And Rand, of course, isn't totally blind. He's picking up on it too.
In response, the man says, "It has been long since we have seen even one of the savages." So that also makes a bit of sense. It's been 20 years since this place has needed any kind of defense from anything.
And I guess it makes sense. None of the Kyrian would go through that pass because, like, they'd just be sold as animals. So the only people to go through the pass would be non-Kyrianans, and
yeah, all they know is never heard from again.
Yeah. So Tinkers and Gleeman, I guess, are the only people that could really go through that pass. And I don't see a whole lot of Tinkers heading into the Waste. Well, not until, I guess Tinkers do tend to take refuge in the Waste during the last battle. They see it as a safe place.
It is. It's a great place to...
The Trollocs call it the Dying Land.
Yeah, you got to make it through the Aiel first, so, just stand behind the Aiel.
You know what city I want to be in the last battle? Ruidian. Ain't nothing happening there.
Perfect.
And I'm protected by thousands of Aiel who have made it their sacred home.
The woman there tells Rand, who they've been referring to as Milord. I should probably have pointed out, and Rand thinks that they must be trying to flatter him, which is a little ridiculous. He just arrived with a giant army. You know?
Right?
No, you don't look like a traveling trader, my dude.
Of course, they don't see the army. The army's hiding. All they see is a small party of people in very nice coats. And this is where I think, again, we're seeing Rand become no longer the farm boy, where he like looks at Matt's coat and is like, ugh, it's a nice coat, but it looks like he slept in it, you know? He's like no longer seeing the nice coats as just nice coats. He's actually like seeing fashion. And these poor people are like just seeing the nice coats. And so he's dressed like a lord, and he's walking around like that, and people are just like, oh, look, a lord. And he's like, why do you think I'm a lord? It's like, well,
'cause you are.
You're wearing the uniform, one.
First of all. Although I guess, people start calling him Lord Dragon, but I think he never really likes that.
He very quickly gets used to it, I feel like. Or he's just like, unlike Perrin, who's always like, don't call me that. Rand is just like, yeah, I'm the Dragon Reborn. Like, Lord
Sure.
Dragon, fine.
Yeah.
Like, Especially, I think, once he gets the Crown of Swords, at that point he's like, well, I am like an actual literal king, as well as the Dragon Reborn. So, yeah. So all three boys become kings, right? Because Perrin becomes, king of Manetheren for all intents and purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Matt is king of the Shan-Chan, Prince of the Ravens. And Rand is king of Ilion, as well as a few other places.
Yeah, a bunch of places.
No, yeah, and it's essentially right, because Perrin ends up inheriting the Broken Crown once his parent, mother, and father-in-law are killed, as well as the Queen of Saldea. So Aiel would inherit the crown, which means Perrin and Aiel would also be king and queen of Saldea, as well as Manetheren.
Which is a huge area. I am turning around to look at my map on the wall. I should probably hang that in a more...
It's definitely not a contiguous area, so I have to wonder if maybe they would have one child rule over... And there's that whole dragon treaty where like the lines of inheritance have to be separated, so I'm guessing that maybe their children went and ruled Saldea. Like one line went there, and then another line stayed in Two Rivers. We'll see.
There's also, everything that's in between is in complete chaos, and it would be hard to say that there is any kind of government anywhere in between the Two Rivers and Saldea.
That's true. It is sort of unsettled land, so one could assume.
Yeah. Rand spent a lot of time trying to feed the people of that region. Aradoman, Bandar Iban.
I had fun the other day. Like a month ago, I sat down and actually marked out all the spots in the map that are not claimed. It's more than you think.
It's
like when you actually look at like where the borders of the countries are, huge chunks of the land are just totally unclaimed by any country. Especially if you consider like the Two Rivers area unclaimed by Andor, which I kind of do because
right, and a lot that is claimed is uninhabited. They're just lines on a map.
Andor's very wide, but pretty skinny.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of runs through the middle of the country, or the land. But again, that's assuming you include all the land all the way up to the Mountains of Mist. And we do hear that the Queen does send people to the Mountains of Mist because that's where they get the valuable minerals, and they chose to make sure they were getting the minerals as opposed to the tobacco and the sheep and the wool.
Said, what was it? Steel and gold were considered more important than tobacco and wool, so we had to pick one or the other. There were not enough soldiers to control all these places.
But I'll be back. We get word that this is the first time we hear the Shaido are taking Wetlanders Gaishain, essentially slaves.
Right.
Because this is Gaishain that you never get to stop being. And because you don't believe in Ch20, it doesn't make any sense. And that does disturb the other Aiel. That's sort of where we're seeing this breakdown of Ch20 among the Aiel.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I think, we see this happen through Rand's visions, where the Aiel are one people, and they split, and one of those splits dies off, and the other one survives. Sort of what I think of as the evolution of the Aiel, right? Because you have this generation after generation after generation, and you get these small little variations, what I think of as like mutations, and then part of the culture is killed. And in a lot of ways, the Shaido are sort of the last split that we see from the Aiel. And they sort of take out the hyper-aggressive, hyper-violent aspect of the Aiel that's not needed anymore because we're going into a peaceful future.
Sure. And, the Shaido have fallen.
They've been corrupted, yeah, clearly. Despite
Couladin's previous actions, this thing that the Shaido are making Gaishain out of Wetlanders seems to really disturb the other clan chiefs, which is unusual. They're not typically phased. And that just tells me that being kind of a crummy person is one thing, but he's crossed a serious line at this point.
Well, Aiel are Ch20, and by violating Ch20 to this level, it's almost like Couladin is no longer Aiel.
Right.
And that's what's really, he's like, this is the first time they can really point to something and say, that is not Aiel behavior. Everything else was just sort of a violation of custom. This is like a serious violation of Toe.
I wanted to note that Rand gets upset at one point when he realizes that there are somewhere around 100 survivors and there are still all these people hanging from the walls. He's like, why don't you cut them down? Why aren't you trying to bury them? What's wrong with you? And they this small group informs him that the Shaido said, you are not allowed to cut them down. That they're a sign that's waiting for someone who's following us. And if we come back and they're not still up there, we'll kill all of you. We'll kill the rest of you.
Which they weren't coming back, but it's an effective threat.
Yeah, I mean, they're terrified. Everyone else in the town is dead. And I assume that Couladin only left these handful alive so that they could tell what happened.
No, he could have killed them easily, probably. But he gave them a message. And he mentions the snakes on his arms, and Rand's like very careful to cover his arms up.
Yeah, he's wearing his coat so the man doesn't notice that he has the same tattoos.
And we also hear a little bit about the other clans. So not all the clans have come to Rand yet. They're still sort of walking in parallel with him, and they haven't really joined him yet.
Yeah, there are some behind, and there's another group. Timolin and his Miagoma had been paralleling them to the north for 3 days, exchanging occasional messengers, but giving no clue as to his intentions.
So he doesn't know if these clans are going to join him or the Shaido yet.
Right, or, attack him, maybe. It's kind of a bit of a veiled threat.
And so he kind of has to have a win, and it's not until, really, it's the battle of, what is the Battle of Jangai Pass, or what is the battle? No.
Battle of Cairhien.
The Battle of Cairhien, that's right, where Matt actually kills Couladin, that all the clans finally come to Rand.
Yeah, and there are some that have already pledged themselves. They just have not been able to catch Rand's moving army yet. They're chasing after.
Yeah, and I guess we could go down through all the clans and figure out what they're currently doing, but we know they end up coming to Rand, and they'll give us a summary of where they stand before that happens.
Yeah, I also wanted to attempt a complete list, but it's a little difficult at this point. It would take more research than is really necessary or interesting, I thought. They all come eventually. They're just still gathering. And I guess maybe it's important to remind folks that because the Shaido left in a hurry, Rand picked up and started moving what he had at the time, right? They're from a place where they were trying to wait for... The chiefs wanted him to wait for all the clans to assemble, which was going to take a month. And Rand said,
right. At Ruidian,
no,
right?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Yeah, I think they
said he was 2 weeks march from Ruidian, so I think that's what they were at Ruidian when Couladin, because they went to Cold Rocks, or they went to the Golden Bowl, and then back to Ruidian, and then Couladin took off, and Rand started following him.
Which, I mean, is the right decision, because who knows how far Couladin would have gotten if he waited for all the clans to be assembled. And Wetlanders can't tell one from the other anyway, so they would just think it was another invading army, which, I mean, it is.
Totally. And there's a lot of Shaido, and also they're growing bigger as the Brotherless join them.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's still a lot of people as they're finding out about the true history of the Aiel. They're catching up and realizing, there's a percentage of them that are leaving our Aiel and going to the Shaido, and it's not a small percentage.
Right. At this point, Ruark and some of his warriors just kind of rise from the shadows, and the Wetlanders pee a little, start yelling, like, oh my god, they're back! And Rand's like, Ruark, was that necessary? Like, couldn't have you just walked up normally?
And Ruark's, tree killers, whatever.
Yeah, Ruark says, we put spears in place around this hold unseen, as you wished, and there seemed no reason to wait, since no one remained here to dance spears. Besides, they're only tree killers. He's like, he doesn't care if they're afraid or whatever. The Aiel very much, and Rand spends a minute thinking about this, but the Aiel as a whole really kind of view the Cairhienin as less than human, almost.
They violated honor.
Animal-like.
Exactly. They saw them like animals. And I really like that he thinks about the inherent contradiction with Moiraine, which is she's Aes Sedai, but she's Cairhienin.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to wonder how much the Aiel... that's one of those things that, like, when I see Moiraine interacting with the Wise Ones, I forget she's, like, very obviously Cairhienin. And you have to wonder how much there's, like, the Aiel are always thinking tree killer in the back of their head when they're interacting with her.
It could very well be, but she's also, like Rand says, Aes Sedai, and he's wondering does one trump the other? How do the Aiel actually view that? I don't know that we ever get a real answer. It's a good question, though.
The Wise Ones certainly respect Moiraine as a person and, like, don't give a crap that she's Cairhienin. But I have to wonder if, like, General Aiel would see that and just probably just try not to think about it and be like, just don't mess with the Aes Sedai.
Right.
And as we see, Aes Sedai tend to, we know it's not strictly true, but they're supposed to not really have any loyalty to their home country and not be of a home country. They're just of the White Tower.
Yeah.
She's not Cairhienin, she's Aes Sedai.
I see Bladen bringing up that Moiraine was related to Laman, also, the tree killer. Although I don't know that any of the Aiel know that. I
suspect, she doesn't really hide her last name, and they know enough to figure it out. So I think the wise ones do. I'm guessing like most Aiel aren't like, oh, that was it, niece of Laman?
Yes, I believe she's a niece. Or like a distant cousin or something like that. She's much younger, obviously.
But I'm guessing the wise ones have figured it out.
Probably. I don't know.
And she's pretty ashamed of her family, too. She's like, we've got a bad name, and we deserve it. Even before Laman, we had a bad name, and he sucked.
Yeah.
And even the modern one, she's like, nah, other than her cousin. Her cousin's pretty cool, but, most of the Damandred name has been filled with idiots and ambitious men who have done terrible things.
And this is Rand responding to Ruark's comment that they're only tree killers. These folk broke no oaths, he told them. Find the others. The Settlemaker says there are about 100, and be gentle with them. If any of them were watching, they'd probably be running away into the mountains by now. The two Aiel started to turn away, and he added, Did you hear what they told me? What do you think of what Couladin did here? They killed more than they had to, Derek said with a disgusted shake of his head, like black ferrets falling on a rockhen's nest in a gully. Killing was as easy as dying, so the Aiel said. Any fool could do either. And the other thing? Taking prisoners? Gai'Shain? Ruark and Derek exchanged looks, and Derek's mouth tightened. Clearly they had heard, and it made them uncomfortable. It took a great deal to make an Aiel uncomfortable. It cannot be so, Ruark said at last. If it is, Gai'Shain is a thing of G.E.T.O. No one can be made Gai'Shain who does not follow G.E.T.O., else they are only human animals, such as the Sharans keep. Couladin has abandoned G.E.T.O. Derek sounded as though he were saying stones had grown wings. Mac guided Pips closer, using his knees. He had never been more than an indifferent rider, but sometimes, when he was thinking of something else, he rode as though born on a horse's back. That surprises you? He said. After everything he's done already, the man would cheat at dice with his mother. They gave him flat-eyed stares.
I gotta jump in there. Matt had never been more than an indifferent rider? Really?
Yeah, Rand makes it kind of sound like... I noticed that too. Rand kind of makes it sound like he had just been like, passably good. And maybe not particularly into it, like not into horses,
But he was totally into horse flesh. That's the one thing he knows more. I guess he's able to identify a good horse, but maybe he was never great at riding them. I mean, we do see Oliver being the one who rides the horses. But yeah, that to me feels like a bit of a inaccurate statement from what we know about Matt later.
Oh, I just assumed this was a comment on the memories that, maybe before he could ride and was competent, but now he's excellent. You know what I mean?
I agree about that. I think that the contrast is too big, though. I think you could say he went from being a good rider to being a great rider.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And I honed in on the word indifferent.
Yeah.
That kind of, it made me think more along the lines that Matt had never been like, yeah, he can tend to horses, he can ride them, he's good with livestock, like that's his father's business, that's all he's done. But this is something different, Like
he's better at judging horse flesh than riding horse flesh.
Right, like a cavalryman would probably be better at riding than a farmer, even though they both can. You know what I mean? One's a professional, the other is... This is just a tool that they use sometimes.
Totally.
I can build a house, but it would be shitty,
Actually, you know what? I bet if you set out to build a house, it would be a pretty goddamn good house.
Well, hundreds and hundreds of hours of YouTube videos later, maybe. Hey, there's a fun little parallel. Now Matt has access to those YouTube videos,
Right. He just gets to play back old people fighting and building houses. I wonder if there's any house building in his memories.
Oh, who knows?
Probably. A lot of people had to build their own houses back in the day.
Yeah. Well, in any case, I'll continue here.
But he would never pick up a hammer if he could avoid it. He'll pay someone to build him a house first.
He had never been more than a different rider. Sometimes when he was thinking of something else, he rode as though born on a horse's back. That surprises you? He said. After everything he has done already? The man would cheat at dice with his mother. They gave him flat-eyed stares, like blue stones. In many ways, Aiel were Ch20, and whatever else Couladin was, he was still Aiel in their eyes. Sept before a clan, clan before outsiders, but Aiel before wetlanders. Some of the maidens joined them, Anila and Jolian and Adelin, and wiry white-haired Siuan, who had been chosen roof mistress of the roof of the maidens in Ruidian. She had told the maidens who stayed to choose another, and now she led the maidens here. They sensed the mood, and said nothing, only grounded their spear points patiently. An Aiel who wanted to could make the rocks look hasty. Lan broke the silence. If Couladin expects you to be following him, he may have left a surprise somewhere in the pass. 100 men could hold some of those narrows against an army. 1,000? We will camp here, then, Rand said, and send scouts ahead to make sure the way is clear. Duwada Mari'in? Water seekers, Derek agreed, sounding pleased.
That was good.
Thanks. That had been his society before he became a chief. Siuan and the other maidens gave Rand flat stares as the rain chief walked away down slope. He had chosen scouts from other societies for the last 3 days. When he had begun to fear what he might find here, he had the feeling they knew he was not just giving the others their turns. He tried to ignore their looks. Siuan's was especially difficult. The woman could have driven nails with those pale blue eyes. Ruark, once the survivors are found, see that they're fed and well treated, and we will take them with us. His gaze was drawn to the town wall. Some Aiel were already using their curved horn bows to kill ravens. Sometimes Shadow Spawn used ravens and other animals that fed on death as spies. Shadow Eyes, the Aiel called them. These barely paused in the frenzied feeding until they fell transfixed with an arrow. But a wise man did not take chances with ravens or rats. And see that the dead are buried. At least in that, right and necessity were the same. Good chapter.
And there's that final... Oh, yeah. There's that final little sentiment that carries through. I also like Siuan's setup, where we get her just from the very beginning, where she's going to beat the shit out of him for leaving the maidens out of protecting him. And we get that motivation all the way from the beginning when she's like, what's going on? Why are we not on patrol?
Yeah, why aren't you using us?
And she's noticing, like, you're trying to keep us out of danger, and you're putting yourself in danger, which is doing us a dishonor. If we haven't heard it before, the maidens carry the honor of the Garakaran.
I'm nodding. But also, this Siuan, I feel like it might be important to note, because Rand did, was the leader of the maidens that had gathered in Ruidian. So she was, roof mistress of the hold that they made in Ruidian, which is a significant position. And she made the maidens under her elect a new roof mistress so she could take the detachment of maidens to war for Rand. She didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? I just think that's significant. It talks about Siuan's motivations, how she feels in this situation.
Totally.
She's really taken personal responsibility to make sure this job is done right. That's what I'm imagining her motivation is. So I feel like that might make her even more upset than a regular maiden might be. You know what I mean? She went out of her way to get this job.
And she was the roof mistress she was the roof mistress of the roof of the maidens in Ruidian. She is like the one in charge of the maidens. Like, she definitely is the one who considers herself like the leader of his guard.
I can't say that I know more about the like internal power structure of the maidens, but she seems high up there. And she is described as an older woman. Am I right? Like
she has blue eyes and white hair, wiry and leather-faced, with a scar across one cheek. No specific age.
Apparently, Siuan is also a town in Poland. Fix those search terms.
I like that Google pulls up, when I type in Siuan, it pulls up the Wheel of Time wiki first. It's like, I know what you're looking for. You just add Wheel of Time to all of your Google searches.
Yeah, I guess we don't. I'm just skimming through this, and I guess we don't see any definite age. I don't think she's ever definitively aged, but I see her as like maybe a little past middle-aged woman who's a very experienced general, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Is she also the one that makes terrible soup?
Yep. No.
Oh no, that's not. Okay.
That's not her. But she's the one who's the maid for a long time, because she gets injured, and then she's made guys shine, or no, she yells at a guy shine. That's what she does. She sends a guy shine to get help, and like yells at her like she's a maiden, and so then she forces herself to be a servant until her shame is like taken care of. Because like that's the most shameful thing you can do, which is like remind a Gaishain of what their life used to be like. So she has to take on like the most shaming position she possibly can.
Oh.
Which apparently was being a servant. Sorry, she uses maiden hand talk to a Gaishain.
He says, uses maiden hand talk to a Gaishain when Rand is missing at some point.
Yeah. I think it's when he's kidnapped by for Dumai's Wells. When the White Tower kidnaps him. Is that right?
It sounds about the right timeline.
Rand in a box.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?